Guys, welcome to the second mini lecture that we're going to give on Sartre and Sartre's theory. And hopefully those of you that are starting to enjoy it are getting a feel for what philosophy is all about. It's usually about taking a systematic theory, a theory that has like a set of logical steps, or logical processes, might be a better term, but anyway, there's a kind of like a chain of logic that goes along to outline a particular theory, and then we apply that theory to real life circumstances, or in this case to something fictional like a film. And before we talked about what negating a nothingness is, this time what we want to talk about is how does negating nothingness let us grow as individuals. We really want to explore that as a concept. So our overall goal today is we're going to explore how a human being grows as they negate a nothingness at the core of their being. Now, if this doesn't make sense, that's okay. This is the introduction to the video. So right now what I'm basically saying is here's some keywords, here's a key idea. We're going to try and explore it through the video. So just know that that's what we're attempting to do. You don't necessarily need to understand it 100%. But let's just quickly go over some of the words that we talked about in the last video. Remember, to negate something means to convert it into its opposite state. Now, usually we encounter negation when we multiply a 1 by a negative 1. And we know that when we do that, we turn it into its negative state, which is that the positive 1 turns into a negative 1. And we also said, well, what if we had a square which represented a universe and a dot in it, and if we needed to negate the dot, we just take the dot away, and that's how we negate it, right? So we knew that to negate is to take something that already exists and make it not exist in our hypothetical universe. But then we thought, okay, well, what about negating nothing? How do we do that? Well, what we do is we take a theoretically empty universe, which has nothing in it, and then we put something in it. We take absence and we negate it to presence. And that's what negating nothingness is all about. It's about negating what's already a negative. And another thing we can basically say is negating is converting something into its opposite state. And we want to look at how this taking this nothingness, this thing that doesn't exist in the real concrete physical world, how we take this nothingness and then we make something exist in the real concrete material world by negating this nothingness. Okay, that's what we really want to explore. Or very confusing at the moment, but just remember, negation means to convert into an opposite state, and a nothingness means, well, the only way that we can really define it is by saying it's a complete absolute absence of anything. Okay, so what are our small goals? Well, we need to revise and recap on this term negating nothingness. So we're going to revise the term negate nothingness. Then we're going to outline a process that explains how human beings grow as they negate a nothingness at the core of their being. Okay? And then we're going to use pop culture to exemplify how this process occurred. So can you write all of these success criteria down in your workbook? And then what I would like you to do is to score yourself out of 4 on each of them based on how well you think you can do each of these mini goals, these success criteria. And it's okay if you give yourself a 1. This is the beginning of the video. That's what we expect. Okay. Now, as I mentioned before, an APK is usually a visual stimulus that says to part of your brain, hey, look, here are some things that you already know. We're going to add to it. So what we're going to do quickly is we're going to use what we covered in our last class and the visuals that we covered in our last class. And we're going to quickly explore a bit of the theory that we covered on, a little bit of a recap. But because we're doing that using visuals, we should have a really good APK exercise, okay? So Sartre was a member of the French resistance that fought against the Nazis when they occupied France in World War II. And he saw a lot of people being persecuted, people based on race, people based on disability, people based on politics. And he wanted to come up with a philosophy that could really account for and explain why people were being persecuted and how people actually, and who's responsible would be a better term for it, who is responsible for the persecution that occurred. Is it just the Nazis, or is it the people who stood by and did nothing? How do we define responsibility? And to do that, he first starts off developing a bit of a metaphysics. And remember, metaphysics means a kind of study of reality of what is real. And he defines two metaphysical beings, right? And when we talk about beings, we're talking about things that exist. That's just the way that you define them. A being equals a thing that doesn't exist. He talks about a thing in itself and a thing for itself. And this was a language that was developed by Hegel and other philosophers before him, but because Sartre really borrows a lot from Hegel, we're going to quote Hegel's kind of interpretation of this. And basically, a thing in itself is something that has its essence fully contained within it, and it can't change its essence. Its essence is permanent. So it acts like a passive object. It doesn't have options. What happens to it is predetermined, like a rock or a chair or a building. All these objects have a predefined, set, concrete essence within, and they can't go through the process of determining what that essence is themselves. But there's also another kind of being. Actually, when you read Kant or Hegel really deeply, you probably find out there are many different types of things for itself, or things for themselves, or things, but you just find out there are plenty of them. But for the sake of a year 10 mini lecture, we'll just go over the basics. He says this other thing called a thing for itself, and a thing for itself is a being, i.e. a thing that exists, that never has its essence fully contained within it, probably until it dies. All right. And what happens is it goes through life interacting with the world, and in the process it shapes or defines its own essence. And that's what this blue stuff is. It's essence. And remember, if you can't remember what essence means, it's the stuff of being. All right. And in the process, because it goes through and interacts with the world, it's kind of a subject. And in English, when we talk about subject, and in philosophy we talk about subject, a subject is an active thing that makes choices and performs actions. It doesn't have things done to it. It does things to things, okay? It does actions to things. So this for itself being is really important, because Sartre argues that human beings are things for themselves, okay? And then Sartre goes, look, you can't really be a thing for itself unless you have this thing called self-reflexive consciousness. Now, consciousness is an awareness of your existence, but it's also an awareness of your awareness, and it's an awareness of your awareness of your awareness, and the process goes on for infinity. And he argues that as we interact with the world therefore interacts with us. It shapes us, but we also become aware of the process through which we as beings are growing and we are being shaped. And the reason why that's so important is because if we weren't conscious of being happy, we wouldn't be happy. We just go through the motions of being happy on the outside. You can only really be happy if you reflect and say, actually, that was happiness. Yeah. So he says that's really important. And this kind of active process we have leads to choice. And when we make choices, we do this really important concept. We negate nothingness. Now, for the purpose of negating nothingness, we're just going to go through a quick definition of it. We're not going to go through the long expose that we did last video, because you can go back and watch it if you're confused. But negating nothingness means you take a nothing. In this case, the square that I'm highlighting right now has nothing in it. So we're going to say nothingness is absence, complete, absolute absence of anything, all right? And then you negate it. To negate a nothingness, you make something. So to take this universe of nothing and negate the nothingness, we put something in it. And so negating nothingness actually means to create something out of nothing, right? And we can demonstrate that using a mathematical example. When we take a 1 and we negate it, it turns into a negative 1. But when we take a negative 1 and we negate that by multiplying it by another negative 1, we in turn create something. We create a 1. So that was the end of our video. I want you to stop now, and I want you to just write down 5 random things that occurred to you, okay? Alright, so let's recap. A for itself being equals a human being, and Donnie Darko is a human being, so therefore Donnie Darko is a for itself being. Okay, take a note. Now, when we watch Donnie Darko make his first major choice of the film, which is to flood the school, we could argue that he has hypothetical options available to him about what he could do. So he could choose to flood the school, he could choose not to flood the school, or he could choose to destroy the school in another way. He actually has many different options available to him. But what he does is he looks at these non-existent hypothetical possibilities, which are choices. Now, when I say hypothetical, I mean that they don't exist in the real physical world yet, right? And we can actually say that these possibilities are a nothingness, because they don't exist in the material world. They only exist as possibilities. Take a note. Now, because these are officially nothing, they exist maybe as ideas or possibilities or hypotheticals, but they don't exist in the physical, concrete material world. We therefore say that Sartre is what we call a materialist, because what he's really concerned with is not what happens in some kind of abstract heaven or some place that isn't here in this universe. He wants to look at things in this universe and use them to explain what happens to human beings. So he's a materialist. He basically argues that everything that exists is material, or, and this is really important, it might not be material, but it exists in this universe. It's not in some kind of heaven. So he is a materialist. Take a note. And like I said before, I'll say it again, these options, these three different choices that he has, they're kind of a form of nothingness. They might exist as an idea or a hypothetical, but they don't exist in the real world yet. Because they don't exist in the real world yet, they're a nothingness. They're a kind of nothingness. And it's the choice and the action, it's the actual action that we make that takes this nothingness and negates it into something. So when Donnie Darko chose to commit to an action, which was to flood the school, and he flooded the school, he took this hypothetical or this possibility or this nothingness and he made it something. He made it real. So he creates his own future in a certain way. Take a note. So not only does Donnie Darko take a possibility and make it real, which is a form of negating a nothingness. This line represents that it's a nothing, and then it becomes green when it becomes a something. So we negate the nothingness, which is the action of the future. We negate it as a possibility, which is a negative, and we turn it into an actuality, which is a positive. All right, and therefore that's symbolized by the green arrow. And not only do we do that, when we act this way, what we do is we say something about who we are and what we believe that we hadn't said before. Take a note. And Sartre argues that, well, that means that we have in our very core, in the very core of our essence, we have this thing which is called a nothingness at the core of our being. Now, another word for being would be essence, the stuff of us, right? In this case, we could say the stuff of Donnie Darko's essence. And by choosing to flood the school, what he does is he basically says, look, I'm a person who values creative destruction. I want to see the world open up for possibilities of real, authentic goodness, something else, yeah? That's what he did when he actually negated nothingness in the other way, which was he made the future. So he negated a nothingness in terms of choosing one option and making it real. But he also negated a nothingness by taking a bit of his essence at the core of his being, negating it and adding to his being by saying this is the person that I am through my actions. And that's why the circle is much larger, because it represents the fact that he has more essence. Take a note. Alright, what I would like you to do now is to pause this video, and I want you to write down 5 key choices that you may have made in your life that really represent the 2 forms of negating nothingness that we've talked about. Okay? Remember, the 2 forms of negating nothingness are taking a non-existent hypothetical possibility, a possible choice, a possible action that you can create, and then making it real. That's negating nothingness. We're taking a non-existent, a nothing, and we're negating it into a something by acting upon it and making it real, okay? So that's the first form of negating nothingness. But the other thing is taking this little dot of nothingness at the core of our being, and through our actions we're saying something more about who we are. we're creating more of our own essence. And I want you to write down 5 key choices that you've made in your life. You don't have to share them. That exemplify how you've basically made the future and defined your essence, or created an essence, created more essence at the core of your being. Now, let's look at this process a little bit more, okay? What we really need to understand is this is a whole process that leads to growth as a person. When you're born, Sartre argues, you probably make your first random and arbitrary. Now, that's a really important word. Arbitrary kind of means like it's a randomness and a meaninglessness that happens as a result of that arbitrariness, right? So as a result of that randomness. So if let's say I make a decision based on flipping a coin, and chance decides what choice I make, effectively the meaning behind the choice is gone because there's a randomness behind it. And that's what we call arbitrary, a meaningless that kind of results from a result of chance or randomness, okay? So let's say your first choice is to cry because mummy wants your attention. Oh, sorry, cry because you want mummy's attention. You know, you're 6 weeks old, you don't really have many other choices available to you. But basically, that's your first choice. And when you do that, you say something about who you are as a person. And that would be negating nothingness, because you're saying, I'm a person who values mummy's attention, okay? And you start to grow. The circle gets a little bit bigger because you're negating the nothingness at the core of your being. But also, if you had the choice to cry or to do something else, you've made the future, okay? Now, then maybe you're 3 or 4 and there's another key thing that happens in your life. It's really, really important to you because you're 3 or 4. It could be, do I make mummy laugh or do I have a tantrum? Okay. Now, therefore you've got different possibilities. And all these things are symbolized by a negative because they don't really exist. They're a nothing, right? They only become real once you choose to act on one and make it real. So you choose one and you act on it and you make it real and you create your future. But you also, again, negate this nothingness at the core of your being and you grow as an individual. Now, that's something you need to talk about. I want you to have a look at this diagram and think about how you actually grow as an individual and write it down. Now, as you can see, the process just goes on and on and on through life, and we grow by constantly defining our essence, creating our essence, and also creating our futures. But one thing that people accuse Sartre of is basically not taking into account facticity. Now, facticity is a really important concept. Facticity are basically all the things that shape the options you have available. Take a note. Now, the reason why I say that is because Sartre argues that you are ultimately responsible for the choice that you make, but you're not responsible for the options you have available. Take a note. So let's be really clear. I mean, you can't, when you're a baby, your options for getting attention and for getting nourishment aren't to go out to work and get a job. You know what I mean? You can't do that because your facticity limits you in your body and your history, and you're basically the only options you really have available at the time are to cry or to do something else to get mummy's attention. So the options you have available are shaped by your current circumstances, and that's what facticity is. Take a note. And one thing you should also take into account is that as you make these choices, you also shape your facticity. Yeah. So Donnie Darko floods the school. Well, he can't really go back from that, can he? So he's made his facticity. He's made the things in the past that shape who he in turn is and what other options he'll have available when he makes another choice. But the thing is, and this is what he makes really clear, even though you can't choose what options you have available, you are the one who chooses which option you make real, and in the process you are the one who defines yourself. Take a note. So you're not responsible for your facticity, but you are responsible for your essence, because you choose the options available, the option you make real, and how you define yourself given your facticity. Okay? So creating a future is negating nothingness at the core of your being. If anything we take out of this video, we need to understand that. And this core of our being is that little dot that we see. And basically we do that by making actions happen, making them real, and saying something about who we are and what we value. Take a note. Now this is just a bit of a side issue, but we would want to look at it. So what Sartre argues is for this to happen, the human being needs to exist across 3 different dimensions at once. We need to have we need to be constantly heading into the future. And we are, in a sense, this hypothetical, non-existent part of ourselves in the future. That's who we are. Until we choose to make one of these options real. And once we do that, then we create who we are in the present. But that present immediately moves into the past straight away, and anything in the past is part of our facticity, but our facticity shapes the choices we have available. So look at this diagram and explain it to yourself, and take a note, and feel free to rewind the video if you didn't understand what I said. Alright, so again, we're going to say it again and again and again. The whole process involves this. Our facticity shapes the options we have available. But we alone choose which option we want to make real. We negate it from a not existent to an actual thing, right? From a possibility to an actuality. And we then also say something about ourselves and define ourselves and create ourselves by saying, through this action, this is who I am. This is the person that I am. And ultimately, we become responsible for the person we become within the facticity that makes things available to us. Alright, so that's the end of that video. Hopefully that was nice and quick this time. Let's have a look at our success criteria. Did we revise the term negating nothingness? Yeah, if anything, what you've got to take out of negating nothingness is that you are converting nothingness into its opposite state. You're taking nothing and you're converting it into something. Yeah. We're going to outline the process that evolves how human beings evolve and grow as they negate the nothingness at the core being. And basically, in your head, you should have this idea that, oh, well, that means I've got a series of options available to me. They're not real yet. I need to negate them from a nothing to a something, or from a possibility to an actuality. And that means by choosing one and acting on it. I can't just say I choose it. I've got to actually commit to action. And in the process of committing to that action, I, in turn, define who I am. I add to myself. I create more of my essence. So if you get that sentence, then you're a 4. You get what I mean? And did we use pop culture? Well, I hope we talked a lot about Donnie Darko as a way of exemplifying how that happened. So have a look at these again. Score yourself out of 4. Remember, I'm available to be contacted at any time you need me to be contacted within school hours. And once you've done that, once you've scored yourself in the success criteria, have a look at this exam-like question and just have a go at writing an answer. Okay? And you should be able to get a big answer from your notes. Cool. Thank you.